Hello and welcome to Holistic Circle Podcast, Spiritual Conversation. My name is Philipp Kobald. We are reaching out to people who are passionate about spreading light, love, and joy. And I think from New York, Marla Bace. Hello, Marla.
Hi, Philip.
All
Thank
right.
you for having me.
Well, you're super welcome. And I think I even managed your name, not that entirely disaster.
You did well. You did very well.
That's something. All right. It's going to be an interesting conversation that I'm looking forward. If you and I would be from the Renaissance, most likely we would call this what we are doing now a meditation. So we will talking about things, not necessarily knowing where we're going or why we're doing it, but we're still going to greatly enjoy it. And as a baseline to give our audience a bit of an idea, we're a little bit going to take your personal life from finishing academy, going into the corporate world, and then transitioning from the corporate world and reinventing yourself. So we have this little bit as a carpet on which our meditations are going to flow. And I'm going to enjoy this very much. And the purpose of it is to basically help people who are making their own questions and journeys in life to use your journey and your experiences and the things that you have seen and felt as a little bit as guidance. And then, of course, we will talk about the work that you do now, where exactly that's then what you're actually doing. So how clever are we? Amazing, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
I learned with one of my last podcasts, if nobody says good things about you, you can say good things about yourself. Now I'm practicing it.
Absolutely. It's all energy, right? And we're all about being positive and playing our lessons forward for people. So yes, absolutely.
Oh, great. Perfect. Okay. But I usually ask my guests at the beginning to give a bit of a self-introduction. Now, in this case, it will be rather tricky that you make a self-introduction without revealing too much, so that our whole conversation is not without purpose. The magic trick is on you. Please introduce yourself without spilling the beans.
Sure, I absolutely will. And I will keep it short. So I am a certified business and leadership coach. And I've come to doing that at this juncture in my life because of the journey that we will speak about. So I won't go into too much of my background at this juncture, but I will say that the beauty of the journey we're going to talk about is that I get to live my life purpose and I get to give back and I get to be in service to people who are already successful or are on the path to success and they're now to get or to become fulfilled. And every day is a journey for me. So I will leave it at that and we'll talk more about who I work with at the end.
Absolutely. Perfectly. We think without spilling any beans, just say that you had a very serious work background, that you've worked in very serious corporate jobs.
Yes.
That you...
I've spent many decades, over 3 decades, post-university working in corporate America from all size organizations, very large organizations, all the way down to startups. And I started my career as a CPA. I worked in operational excellence. From there, I migrated to marketing. And now I am in coaching and giving back and in service to people. So that's 100,000 foot level.
I think that's important people to know that they understand why we're having this conversation. So let's start at the beginning as we agreed on. And I think it's valuable. We will always going to jump back, jump forward, and then here and now and back. So a little bit of a, and why is it a spiritual conversation? Maybe let's just quickly put this to the people out there. I think we're going to touch several levels of spirituality that are interesting. One will be corporate culture and how it might connect with other things, but also life's journeys, life growth, and the decisions we make and stuff like that. I think there is a valuable spiritual conversation that we are going to have. So just so people understand where this all fits in, because they think they accidentally went to a business podcast I
Yes.
wish, but no, no money
No,
spirituality.
I think we will touch on spirituality from a variety of directions. As you said, looking back, looking forward. And as we always say, hindsight is 2020. So being on this side of my journey, I have a lens on things that happened early on that I can share. And if other people experience those, maybe they'll have heightened senses in the now, and it won't take them 30 years to look backward.
That would be fantastic. Now, let's start with the beginning. And a young woman finishing university, standing, so to say, at the gates with the diploma in her hand, all happy and smiling, family taking pictures. Bring us there to this moment, how you felt it, and how we see that things might have changed to the generation right now taking the diploma in their hand, if you're so be so kind.
Sure. And I'm going to tie this into our before we went live conversation so people can understand. We were talking about so many young people today having so many choices, and people of our generation or my generation almost complaining that they are not plugging themselves right into the matrix. And what we had said is, yes, it's because we have so many indigos and starseeds coming in. And I really think that's a good thing. When I came out of university, which is what you're asking me, I was told at that point, you become a doctor, lawyer, or an accountant, or we're not going to pay. And this was even before going out of university. We're not going to pay your school bills, and you're not going to be successful. There was no flexibility in that. And being the people pleaser that I was, and this was long before I really understood astrology beyond the New York Times, 2 sentences, what you do every week, I followed that path. And what I realize now, being on my true spiritual journey, looking back, is your higher self and your guides all through your life are giving you clues or cues. If you choose not to follow them, life is actually harder. And I remember coming out of university and getting that top job, working in a very large public accounting firm. And we started in September, you graduate in June, start in September. I think we had just turned the clocks back. It was November. And I'm walking out of the staff room and it was dark. And it was the first time that I can still viscerally see that day because it was so impactful to me. And I remember that was the first time that my guide showed me what being plugged into the matrix meant. It meant showing up for work in the dark and leaving at the end of the day in the dark and being a number and just cranking things out, which now I look back and I see by listening and being that people pleaser and doing what society and my parents expected of me without question. And that's really what I want to bring forward. People should be open to questioning and asking what's right for themselves and understanding the environment and the choices they're making, and to not just go with the flow, which I think goes into some of the topics that you want to talk about. But for me, it was, I just resigned to myself. And that was the beginning of why I've had so many careers, which puts me in a great position to be a coach today. But it meant that I didn't have a straight up trajectory. I was constantly about every 10 years doing some soul searching and changes as a result of that.
The first question that comes to me, that must probably be a completely wrong one, but was life maybe limiting, but also simpler then? Because you basically had like 3 options: as doctor, lawyer, or accounting, and that's it. And there was not like this multitude of choices. Should I become a podcaster or a researcher, go to Guatemala and try ayahuasca? Basically, you had a chance, doctor, lawyer.
Yeah. No, I think in a lot of ways, we as human beings tend to equate simplicity with easy. And so while the choice was easier, and it's funny because later in life, I've often been told I'm very articulate and I would kid around about I'm a frustrated trial attorney. That was one of my choices until I actually raised my hand and said I wanted to do it. My parents did the math behind it. They said, no, you're going to be an accountant. Simpler? in that I didn't have a lot of choices. I would say harder in that I wasn't true to myself. And looking back at that point, they had really pulled the rug out from underneath me because I had gone to art school and I was an absolute creative. I didn't fit in to the in crowd in school. I always did my own thing. And again, in hindsight, I was definitely much more of a spiritual being until I took that step post university. And for the next 25 years, it was doing what was expected of me until, and now in hindsight, again, post, being on this spiritual journey, I get to look back and say, yeah, every time there was a massive shift, it was because I was so against what it was I was really here to do,
Right.
or in an environment that wasn't conducive to me being me.
I still stay the devil's advocate because we have tons of data of young people now being overwhelmed by choice. At the other side,
Yeah.
we know your limitation was way too limiting, and especially you had that creative, you had that spiritual inclination, it's all there all the time, but you've been pushed into something that was clearly wrong for you, and that's or wrong. What is wrong? But you grow to the
Yeah.
woman you are today through those
Yeah.
experiences, and you can do what you do
Absolutely.
because of those experiences. But today, people struggle with being overwhelmed and stressed by choice, almost terrorized by choice, because
Yeah, that's very true. I do work with a lot of people business people who own their own businesses, and oftentimes they are not growing or not moving forward because it's actually a fear of getting more work or more overwhelmed or more chaotic. So yes, you're spot on. Too much choice can also cause analysis paralysis. But what I tend to see is that simplicity creates almost a cult mindset. It's if everybody else is doing this, so I'm just going to do it because it's going to be easier. And sometimes you lose your free will because you are doing what's expected or the shoulds and the coulds, which is part of that spiritual journey you start to learn. Whereas when you're in a corporate environment, you do that because your livelihood depends on it, your family depends on it. There's other, factors. But yeah, no, I agree with you. Too much choice can create chaos too in someone's mind.
let's demonstrate to the audience what a meditation conversation is all about. We will never make a point, and we will always agree and disagree in the same time, and it will be wonderfully harmonious. So there you go. It used to be a regular thing. People just talk.
Yeah. Yeah, it used to be dialogue and win-win and discourse. Now it's either just argument or yeah, no, I
And
love that. Thank you.
position. Where it begins, where it ends? Nowhere. That's a
Yeah.
meditation.
Yes. We're gonna win to place. Yeah.
All right, old school, all the way today. So you've had the choice made for you. It's almost like an Indian marriage fixer. So you got fixed to your job, and now you were, as you said it, put the big girl pants on, and yeah,
Yeah,
you grind into it and full steam ahead. The way I just know you for one day, but I could tell that you went full steam ahead, and
I did.
as a result, climbed the ladder and used the elbows and made your little corner in the corporate world. Tell us these early
Yeah.
days, a little bit your impression. Well, I'm sure it was not all gloom.
No, it is. Once you go through your dark night of the soul and you're truly on your spiritual side, you look back and it is easier being part of, right, the matrix. So I was an accountant for 10 years, and that meant I was a true CPA, public accounting, financial reporting. So it meant 65, 70-hour work weeks. I, had a significant other that we actually complemented each other really well. But in a lot of ways, I look back and I realize my attraction to that person was because they bucked the system. And so like they were going to participate in the draft. I was just dating myself a little bit. For, the Vietnam draft. They worked outside. They were a blue collar worker. They didn't have a university degree. And so it it allowed me to see both worlds and still participate a little bit in what wasn't part of the system when I wasn't at work. But what was interesting is I think what that did, and once we had gotten married, it gave me enough confidence to start questioning things again and to be more of myself. And so my next career move, in hindsight, aligned with me stepping into who I was. So at this point, I'm probably my young 30s. And I was sitting around a 5-hour corporate executive table. We were taking a known entity worldwide public. And I had the CFO and the controllers coming back from the ladies' room very late at night. And they both just looked up and they looked at me and go, "What are you doing in finance?" And I realized my personality came out. And I said to them, I go, because I'm supposed to be. And it was a conversation that took place over a couple of weeks after that first initial day. They're like, "What do you want to do?" And I wish, again, I had the wherewithal to ask questions and to know you didn't just do what was logical or in front of you and put one foot in front of the other. Um, so at that time, I had quite literally just walked through an advertising and marketing wing at this very large organization. And so I said to them, marketing. I wish I had said HR because I'm definitely the people person. And as I look back at the rest of that career, I probably would have liked to have been supporting people all of that time. But because I was a go-getter, as you put it, and I was a worker, they put their trust in me and they actually networked me out of that company and into another company, into a position of opportunity. And so I look back at that and say, when you're true to yourself and you're not in cognitive dissonance and you really are sitting with your inner work. And at that time, I hadn't even realized that I was doing that. I just knew I wasn't happy. You get opportunity. That's the universe acting, right? In synchronicity and saying, "Yay, you did good." Like you stepped out of what you should do and you were who you were and you got what you really wanted. You manifested it. So that was the first, as I look back, the first time I can really say that I was pretty much done with the situation and the universe opened an opportunity for me. And I was really successful at that. And I was able to get into marketing at the ground floor with an organization that usually only hired people in the positions that I was in from an MBA program like Kellogg and a top tier marketing school. So I was classically trained and that gave me my marketing chops for the rest of my career. And then shortly thereafter, the same thing happens again. So that organization gave me an opportunity. I loved it. It was something new. I could go in, I could challenge myself. And then it was like 3 or 5 years later, I'm just back into the grind again, which isn't who we are as spiritual beings. We're really not meant to be in, and we talked about this before we came on air, in these cults. And every corporation has its own energy, its own identity, and people comply to a point until you really don't feel like you belong anymore. And so it was at that juncture that I quite literally had, again, as we talk about it in spiritual context, the spiritual 2x4. It just hit me. I walked into work one day and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And I needed to step away. And so I took a leave. And yeah, I want you to ask me some questions because I was like,
Yeah, no, you
that's
been.
gonna
It's first of all, I love to hear you talk, and it was important that journey. But now, basically, you already answered my next question, but you just started, and I want to spend a bit more time on this question. And I again want to reach to the audience where you said always the organization. But I really like that you always referring to it was like an entity on its own, like a person on its own. Is this organization and that? And this is without any deeper philosophy or not to trigger anybody, because it's the last thing we want. But I think you've experienced it and I've experienced it, and this is all common knowledge, that bigger companies, or also some smaller, but mainly bigger companies, start to become a being on its own or a life on its own. We use the word maybe cult or semi-religious thing, where they have their little rituals, sometimes their own little language, and people who they expected to devote themselves to this cult to some extent. And some of it is maybe planned and organized, some just naturally came over time. And it's not our job here to judge or to deeply go into it, but it would be lovely to spend a couple of minutes, and so many people who not had the possibility to experience this, to just talk about this semi-religious thing, cult thingy that goes on in some of those big corporate America elements. Can you a little bit say something about it?
Absolutely. And to your point, Philip, it's not just the large corporations. I've seen it in smaller companies too. We're in 2025, so it's very common for us to talk about a connected consciousness and to bring consciousness to whatever it is we are doing, especially when we're talking spirituality. I know I didn't when I was younger, and I don't think most people realize that when you are in an organization, by definition, you have a collective consciousness that is evolving. And to your point, whether it's on purpose or not on purpose, employees really identify themselves, not just with their role. Like I used to be a chief marketing officer, but it wasn't just the role, but it was the company. And you get very aligned to that. And it can be hard on purpose. I ran employee engagement programs. And a great example of that, much later in the career than what we're talking about now, we were launching big advertising initiatives. And those are meant to get followers and customers from the outside, right? But who better to talk about and sell an organization than its employees? So yes, you're right. We very consciously rolled all of what we were doing on the outside to the inside because we wanted the people speaking the language.
We don't have a completely similar background, but I have quite an insight from my work experience. And I also know some big corporations who run specific programs more focused on their actually employees than on getting new customers, although they're putting it on billboards and stuff. I, for example, can tell you that most of the political campaigning is more to motivate their own followers to go from door to door and be excited than to actually get new voters. So there's a lot of this going on also with corporations. So it's sometimes done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're spot on. I think there's the organic organization that happens just because you are there for so many hours a day. You become friends with the people that you work with. So you're identifying with them. You're identifying with the company. You're identifying with the work ethic, with the expectations, with the brand colors, all of those things that as marketers we are doing. And we may not be, again, consciously driving that behavior that you're talking about. And that happens organically. And that is a collected and a connected consciousness. And then there is the, I don't want to use the term propaganda, but it's the internal engagement with the employees to have them really identify with the brand, with the company, and become the promoters of that environment. And it also plays into, again, that organic aspect. There is, like, think of Coke and Pepsi, right? People who work for Coke are all about Coke, and people who work for Pepsi are all about Pepsi. And they're ostensibly the same product being brought to market, but that happens from inside the company.
And not to even go so far, there are actually smart books written by theologians who look at stuff. There's some very good book written on Apple, almost really being one of the new big faiths. They go even very
Yeah.
far in their analysis and really calling it the church of and how they, and there's been some very smart book, I forgot now the name, that looks at also the Apple Store, how it has sacral elements, that the people at the beginning and the whole celebration, the waiting in line with the new presentation. And there's so many clear church elements done deliberately to have this great celebration. And I worked myself from outside for one of the big ones. I was many years rather horribly well-paid photographer. I did the big campaigns for some very big corporations. So I worked intensively with those teams. And so I know what they're thinking because I had to execute it.
Yeah.
And
No, and it's true, not only the execution, but so I was really young. I was interning. So before I got out of university, I did have the opportunity to intern at Pepsi, and I was a diehard Coke drinker. And so I could get all the free soda I wanted, and I never drank anything but water. And I was questioned. And I remember that had such an impact on me. I was like, oh my God, I have to comply, but I don't like this. And it was a little controversial when especially I didn't ultimately get a full-time offer. I've often wondered, was it because I didn't drink Pepsi?
could be. For my job, I had the privilege to work for several very big guys and been sometimes working over 2-3 years making their campaigns. And so I could see how different one company culture is from the other. And when you work with them, you expect to, for that time you work with them, they had their standards, what is for them appropriate and what is not, right? Somewhere you had to be, all smart and everything had to be smart and all of like this. And while others, so these kind of small things, even from a outside contractor, it was expected to follow the rules. And if you, as you said, if you fit on nicely, you get higher again. And I know for a fact that I just got, for example, one of my biggest clients. I won't name a name. It's the French biggest in the industry. And I only got the job, not because I was good in photography, which is embarrassing, but that company was horribly on good manners. So if they had a choice to take a not so absolutely genius photographer who's incredibly polite versus maybe a better photographer who is just rude, a little bit shouting, or maybe a little bit making inappropriate jokes with the girls, just a little bit, just even talk about anything crazy. They told me, we hire you because we're absolutely sure that you will treat everyone politely and correctly on set. And they hired me for almost 6 years, whole Central Europe market. They gave me for 6 years. It was an enormous amount of money just because I'm naturally quite polite.
Yeah, no, I've experienced that in my career too. There was a period of time I worked at UBS and I was in Zurich. And you want to talk about people really identifying who they are with the organization, UBS versus Credit Suisse. And they were on the same end of the street on Bahnhofstrasse. And they could be doing the exact same thing for each bank, but they had very definitive cultures and they felt very much that they belonged to that culture. And if they had to leave their job, it would be for a private bank or a step down or whatever. They very rarely saw each other working for the other company. The interesting thing was at the time that I was there was a lot of leadership crossover between the two companies. And it shook up the cultures because that was a change that for hundreds of years would never have happened. And there's tone at the top and energy from the top.
We were always neighbors because I was 3 years living in Swiss in La Clamart.
Yeah,
There we go.
Probably had a lot of
All right.
crossover.
We're losing our audience with this little bit of inside conversation, but we're just trying to make a point that these modern forms of, because we always said, people losing religion, people losing faith, people losing these things, and it's absolutely true. And people say that we're losing fasting and feasting, we are losing the ceremonial elements of our life. And all of this is super true, and I'm very sad about it. But we tried here to make this point more or less that these corporations kind of recreate some of these traditions, some of these rituals. And that is basically one of the things that you were aware, prepared, not prepared, got pushed into it. And ultimately, now we're moving further. Ultimately, it became heavy.
Right. And I will just add on to what you said that while, yes, we've walked away a little bit from traditional religions, and the industrial age or most of the 20th century was very corporate culture focused, where even 3 or 5 years ago, we would not be talking about spirituality in the workplace. And you would not be talking openly about your spirituality, your belief system. And that's actually what I do want to talk about is I'm seeing that so much more now. And people are coming back to their individualism, coming back to understanding cognitive dissonance, understanding what is my purpose. And it doesn't have to be directly aligned to what it is you do day in and day out, but what you do should feed to whatever that purpose is. So recently, I just read a book about this, and I thought the author said it really well. So for example, someone who is working super hard because he wants to have a better life for his family, his purpose is a better life. So when he's making the decisions, do I complete a project for work or do I show up at my son's game? And that person is completing the work assignment instead of showing up for their family. They're able to, within themselves, quell that uncertainty because what they're doing in the moment is they are ultimately achieving their higher purpose by choosing the work event over the family event. And they're less stressed about it and they're less angry or frustrated about it. So in my opinion, 2025 allows us to stay in mindfulness. It allows us to have these conversations. I was at a client the other day. The company's been in existence for over 30 years, and the CEO is up there in years and said to me, I meditate every day and I bring this in. Do I see it in the organization? No, I think that's the next step, bringing that level of consciousness. And I was actually on a podcast recently with someone who was pushing the idea of a chief consciousness officer. So I think as we're getting into this next evolution, as you said, past sort of the organization driving who we are, and we really go into who and what our spirituality is, I think we get to start to define what we want collective consciousness to look like.
That's why we did all the groundwork, so we can go there now. But quickly, before we go there, so let's make this snappy. You had then this transition where you basically more or less reached the end of this part. And let's quickly go through the transitional moment.
Sure. And I'm going to capture these because it's happened more than once. So I can look back now and say, when we talk about spirituality and we talk about your guides are going to keep giving you the same lesson until you figure it out, I can say I had this happen to me probably 3 times during my career. So I won't go through each one of them, but you just get to that low, whereas I can't show up for work for another day. I don't belong here. This is too difficult. I think today we label it depression. The reality of it is I don't look at it as depression. I look at it as that disconnect between purpose and what your activities are. And so each time I had that happen, I was fortunate enough that I've had a home support system that allowed me to go inward. Now, when this was happening over the decades, I wouldn't have known that's what was going on. But now I can look back and say, no, those were moments that I went in and I said, okay, what is it I really want to do? How do I get there? Who can help me get there? I'm a big proponent of Dan Sullivan, who's been a business coach for years, but he talks about the who and not the how. So I was fortunate. I had coaches during my career. I've had psychiatrists. I've had shamans now in this part of my career. So it's all about where I started saying, ask questions, gain understanding, make intelligent decisions. so that you're in line with your purpose. And that's what allowed me to be successful every time I reinvented myself. So we were talking about, I went from being a CPA to having this great marketing training springboard. And then I realized I didn't belong there. And I actually took a time out. I came back. I was with a nonprofit and they allowed me to leverage all of my skill and it allowed me to be seen. And then I had an accounting firm who needed to grow. And they said, you understand the finance, you understand surveys, you understand all this stuff because of where I was. And they hired me into that role. And then I got to do all the neat thing until that wasn't fun anymore. And I realized that had its that was probably anyone who has worked in a law firm, an accounting firm, a financial advisory firm, anything like that, they will understand that there might be a banner. And in that case, it might be a desired collective or connected consciousness, but there are fiefdoms. And that makes it just even all the more challenging to figure out who you are and where you belong. But from there, again, I was successful until I realized I don't want to do this anymore. And I, had the next opportunity that, I say it's not luck. I say it's serendipity, synchronicities, and the universe. So the last sort of corporate evolution of my career, I was quite literally on a golf course and I had sort of given up on what it was that I was going to do next. And we were golfing and somebody, the corporate attorney actually looked at me and said, what is it you want to do? And I was like, I'm tired of leading teams. I'm tired of being plugged in. I want to be a sole contributor. I don't think any company is going to look at me because of all my experience. That seems like a lot. That was my next opportunity. She introduced me to who my future boss was. We had a conversation, and that was the beginning of me going on my own and doing coaching. But I think the takeaway is if you give yourself the time to connect with yourself and you really look at the synchronicities of what's going on around you, you're better able to make the right decisions and to step out of that connected consciousness that you believe you should participate in. I'm obligated to, this person wants me to, all of those things that we all struggle with.
I have to say, I'm so happy with this podcast because this is really why I'm doing this, because I'm so always desperate to break the norm. And when you think about a spiritual podcast, you have somebody, with crazy hair color and some Indian clothings, again, doing ayahuasca in Peru. And you think, oh, it's a spiritual podcast. And this is something that is true and it is happening. And I have them on my show and I love them. And they love me, and it's a wonderful conversation. And we can talk about shamans, and I have angel seers, and I have all of it, and I want all of it. But then I have you, and
recovery corporate executive.
Exactly. And why not?
Yeah.
Why would you not have a right for spiritual life? Why would you not have a right for search? Why do you have to have 3 colors in the hair? Why do you have to have all of this to be spiritual? Who made up these rules? And this is what I'm so fighting here on this podcast to show that we all have our right to express spirituality, to search for it and live it.
Yeah. And Philip, I actually echo your sentiments because, I've spent, I'll say the last 5 years going through my dark night of the soul, waking up and being this spiritually conscious person and understanding and starting to open my clairs and working truly from a galactic and a shaman level. I've had a lot of people say to me, what you're meant to do over 2020, 21, 22, what you're meant to do doesn't exist yet. And I'm a type A. I'm used to being New York City head of marketing. And I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't exist yet? And it was so incredibly aggravating. And then as I came into 2025, I started to, and I've been doing coaching for a couple of years now. I've coached her 20 plus years, but I started to have spiritual people who are business owners coming to me. And I was like, okay, is that what they meant about marrying my business experience with spirituality? And then as I kept questioning and I'm watching the landscape change and the conversation change, And realizing, no, why we weren't ready was until we truly got into the golden age, the age of Aquarius. You are not going to have business people say, like my client did, I meditate every morning. I subscribe to mindfulness. I now take on a client and we're working towards a business goal. But my first session with them, free, is always mindfulness. What stories are you telling yourself? What negative speak? What are you programming? World energy. And now that I understand that, I can do that. I couldn't have done that a year ago with my clients. They would have fired me. They would have thought I was woo and they would have thought I was crazy. But now people and my clients are 230s, both of them lean on me more for the mindfulness aspect of our coaching sessions sometimes than the business aspect because they're craving it, but they don't even know what they're craving yet. So I do think we are ahead. And then we've been asked to be here to bridge this gap between the corporate and, as you're saying, working in the politically correct environments with understanding spirituality and how the two need to come together because we are building new systems and we are building new ways of doing business for the next generation.
And another very big theme is happening here. I'm having more and more academics come to my podcast. And it was very hard, the most hard guests to get to my podcast are serious academics who are teaching on serious academies because they're like, oh, spirituality, reputation. But I fought very hard. These are the guests I fought very hard. I said, please, you have knowledge that seekers might need. Can you not just come and just tell the knowledge, even because people, you have such an enormous amount of wisdom that searchers need.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm more and more getting into the vibe. And now my phone's starting to ring. Where, first of all, there's a really bunch of researchers out there who are trying to breach that gap as you're doing it, who don't want to be defined, either woo-woo or conservative academics and no angels, no nothing. So there's more and more coming out of the woodworks and they're seeking me, they're calling me like, hey, I'm here, I'm a good guy. And so this is happening in corporate. You're starting it and most probably others. It's happening in academia.
Yeah.
I know it's happening in education a lot.
Yes.
So this is becoming a theme that people are sick and tired of being put in categories.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I even at first, when I started going through this, I thought my family was all going to be like, oh, she's having a midlife crisis. And I have a niece who was going through some of her own challenges and Georgetown educated, Harvard MBA. And she called me and she said, how do I get, that she broke up with a boyfriend, how do I get his energy cleared? How do I get a reading? And what is astrology and what is tarot? And I'm like, yes, we have shifted. Like to me, and I have goosebumps head to toe now as I share that. Because, I probably was there when I was in my late teens or in my 20s, but I had nobody that I could have confidently and safely asked any of those questions. And would my life have been very different? Probably. Would I have all the knowledge? Like you said, I've learned all these things the hard way. So I'm in the right place now to be able to give back and to be in service. But I'm thrilled for her that here's somebody who's totally plugged into the matrix as we know it, right? Higher education, especially coming out of Harvard, but is still open to these conversations. And I love when she asks me very esoteric questions. I see where the rubber isn't hitting the road yet, but I love that their minds are open to taking it in.
And I think it won't be very long until they might really have educators on Harvard helping those young people to be also aware, because basically there won't be no other way. So let's use the little time we have left to look into the far future. We're already starting to have dreams for new professors. What would be your bottom line? What would be different in terms of business, bottom line, money, or nature or happiness or work-life balance. What do you wish for this new generation? What's your wish?
So it's what's interesting is when I'm going to answer that with heart-centered business. And that is what I currently bring to the table. But what's so interesting is I've had a little chat with ChatGPT about 2 months ago, and I was asking, what do they define as heart-centered business, and what is this evolution going to look like? So I didn't even know we were going to have this question. And what was so interesting to me is it was how I always managed my teams. And I laughed and I'm like, this is why it was so hard for me for 30 years being in corporate America, because I was bucking the system. But I have people who continue to stay in touch with me and who just relationships and a network forever because of it. But it really is about people are no longer a number. You need to be able to give them flexibility within the workplace. A lot of the things that we're seeing, but it's also like I have one organization that I'm working with now, and it's about making sure that the people are being considered, not just the organization, which is 180 degrees from most of the acquisitions and divestitures that I've worked with in the past. Never mind just trying to make a single workplace a better environment. It used to be organizations would come at it as we talked about, how do we get the employees to engage with us on our terms and spread our message and do what we want? Now I'm seeing it as, how do we keep our employees engaged so that we have a better workplace, a more productive workplace, and ultimately the company gets to where it wants to be. So I am seeing the flip. I'm seeing it more with small and mid-sized companies, and that's why I really enjoy working with them. And work-life balance is something I think we all strive for. There's some industries it's always going to be less, especially with entrepreneurs, but there is a way to achieve it, and there is a way to work smarter and to be in alignment with yourself. It's a very long answer to your question, but I hope I answered it.
I didn't want to break you, but I had to crack a joke. How do you not know that I asked ChatGPT before this interview, which question should I ask her? And ChatGPT remembered your thing, and he told me, ask her this question. How do we not know that?
Yes, we are definitely in an age of AI, so it's even more important to think for yourself, right?
Oh, wow. Don't get me started. It is interesting because I've asked this question for a couple of people, to be honest, the same question, because I love this question. Where are we going next? And the answers you get are so wonderfully different and, in a sense, very revealing. And you are clearly so down to earth and hands-on, and you have a consulting business people come, and you cannot dream around. You have to get things done.
Yeah.
And this, you can feel it so strong with your answer. Small steps, clear steps, baby steps, persistent steps. And
It's always moving forward. Even if it's chaotic, forward is progress.
Forward is progress.
You need to do something.
And so I love to hear, I love to have heard your answer, because it was so you. And this is wonderful, because we all don't know where the journey is going to go ultimately. But we all have been through your story. I've been through my story, and my story was great. And your story clearly was, in the end, great.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But we would also wish that my children, our children, whatever, next generation, that they maybe can make the choices a bit more relaxed. That's it.
And for themselves, not for others. That's what I would wish for them. To be successful, knowing what it is they want, and that they're able to comfortably and confidently inquire, ask, research, do whatever it is they need so that they can make the right choice for themselves.
I'm just watching if my daughter is somewhere. As a young father, I completely disagree with the last sentence 100%. I know what's good for her.
Yes, as parents.
Not that share we're going to listen, but all right. I This was wonderful, and I hope that some people stayed
Thank
with us. I hope that some people took the great. I think it's one of the most craziest podcasts this year because it's completely out of form, and still it talks to millions of people out there who live a normal life, do their job, grind in, have their thing. And is there anything else out there? And where do I have place for it? And what would actually bring me exploring it? And you've done it, and you demonstrated that this is actually a beautiful journey, a productive journey, a successful journey, and being in alignment and a little bit listening to yourself and doing good to yourself actually can lead to wonderful, good new things.
Yes.
So from my
Yes.
perspective, I say thank you very much. And of course, all the information, everything
Thanks.
will be down at the video. Thank you so very much.
And thank you, Philip. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Marla. Thank you.